preparing your rack for winter, you're going to need to do a few things to make it fit for purpose. With regard to the quick draws, what you'll want to do is make sure that you've got plenty of these types, we call them 4-foot slings, so they can be extended and reduced in size. So I might carry at least 4 of these type of extenders. I'm going to take away some of my short extenders that I use in the summer and add some screamers. Sometimes the winter protection can be particularly marginal on stubby ice screws or warthogs, which I'll explain about later. And so this reduces the shock loading effect in a fall, and so a couple of those can be quite useful. The other really important thing in winter is to differentiate between the end that you clip to the protection and the end that you clip to the rope. Here I've got 2 different coloured carabiners. It's obviously exceptionally important to do this in summer, but the reason I'm highlighting this for winter is because quite often when people are removing gear or placing gear, this end of the protection end of the carabiner can get chipped and scraped with the pick of your ice axe, and that means it roughens up, and so it's not such a big deal when that end is in the peg or wire, but if it was this end to be roughened up, and then when you clip the rope into it, any burrs or snags on it could easily cut through the rope in the event of a fall. So be extra vigilant with that in winter. The other thing is a couple of extra carabiners. Obviously we use some screw gate carabiners in the belay, but with all screw gates and carabiners that are have a solid gate, they're prone a little bit to seizing up in the winter. So there's nothing wrong with, as you're preparing your rack, just adding a drop of oil to make sure it's not going to seize up. You'll notice that the carabiners that I'm using here are all wire gate, and there's good reason for that. A, they're light, and you're pretty much always going to be walking a long distance before you get to your climb when you're winter climbing, so you want them to be light. The other thing is that they don't freeze up as badly. There's plenty of space here, and it doesn't get blocked up with ice or snow, and this mechanism is really good for staying unblocked. So on a typical mixed route, there's nothing wrong with having up to 14 quick draws. The other thing that I would add quite a lot of is slings. On a typical mixed route, they're going to get hoovered up in the belays quite readily, but also you find that you're using threads and spikes quite a lot more often than when you're doing normal rock climbing. So I've got 5 normal length slings here and 1 extra long one. When I say a normal length one, it's just a 120 centimetre sling, and this is a 240. I only carry 1 of these. They are useful in the belays, and so yeah. Note the other thing here is I've got a bit of tat holding this all together. Also having some in your rucksack just in case you need to abseil off. So a bit of tat never hurts. So what we can do with our summer rack here is we can take away the micro cams that we've been using over the summer. Unless you're climbing exceptionally hard routes, you can take away your micro wires as well. And what I do is I add to my normal double set of wires some offsets. Now offsets are particularly useful because they're offset. And if you have a crack that's got quite a bit of ice in it, you can offer it up to the crack and then hit it with your ice axe until it wedges in. Now because these are narrow at the front, it means that they actually go in a little bit like a peg would into the crack. And so when you're hitting it in to chip away the ice and to get the placement, these actually go in really, really well. The other thing is that they actually come out reasonably well because, you know, the wide end is towards the wide end of the crack and the narrow end is towards the narrow end. And so on top of having a double set of nuts and walnuts, I put in some offsets as well, usually making up to 2.5 sets of wires. Putting them on nice big carabiners like this are really useful. Don't forget that obviously you're going to be wearing gloves all the time, and so having a nice big carabiner really helps. So I might take with me on a say a route of up to maybe grade 5 or 6, maybe 4 cams. Cams like this are really useful because you can manipulate them quite well with gloves on. The type of cams that have 2 stems and you need to put one finger in a little trigger between the 2 stems aren't so useful because it's hard to get your finger through the little hole. So I like this type with a single stem because they're easy to use. And of course we're going to be keeping on our hexes if you actually use these in summer. The good thing about these types of hex or torque nut is that they have an extendable system like this, and that means that you can clip your rope to it without sometimes having to use an extender, and extenders are premium. 14 did sound like quite a lot, but don't forget that you could easily find yourself having to use a 5-point belay, and that's going to hoover up quite a lot of carabiners. So this type of system is very useful. Now then, we're going to be adding a few extras. So one of the first things, especially for mixed routes and ice routes really, are pegs. Now then, you get a good supply here, or you want some a couple of blade pegs, some lost arrows, and some angle pegs of different sizes. I sometimes carry up to 6 on 2 carabiners, but what I always do is I tie a loop of 5mm accessory cord around the peg. Now this is really useful because they rack nicely on a carabiner like that, but also when you're putting one in, you can have it clipped to a carabiner, and so when you smack it and it falls out, you don't lose it. And also when you are hitting the peg with your axe and you miss, if you've got a bit of loop in here, then you're just smashing up the bit of rope instead of a carabiner, which you'll completely mangle. So for getting the pegs in and taking them out, having this little bit of loop here to have the carabiner clipped to is really good. Obviously what you do when you actually got the peg in place is you clip the eye of the peg properly. So that's a very useful thing to do. Another thing that you might have with you on your winter rack is a warthog. These are good in frozen turf and turfy cracks. Anyway, so when you place one of these, basically you hammer it in like a massive tent peg, get it in as far as you can, and then on the way out you twist it out using the pick of your ice axe. Put the pick of your ice axe and wind it out like that. So these can be pretty useful. Some routes are so turfy that you'll find yourself carrying, you know, maybe even up to 4 or 5 of these things. Speaking of turf, this bulldog here goes in conjunction with a warthog. Generally they're used in turf and turfy cracks, and yeah, once again you can get these in, smack it in with your axe. When you're placing one of these, well, usually you're having a bit of a hard time because nothing else will go in, so you're a bit scared. So you get it in, but what you've got to think about is if you actually want to see this again, you want to leave a little bit of this sticking out, yeah, so that your mate can then put his ice axe, the pick of his axe, in and lever it out. If you smack it in so far like that, then it's very, very, very difficult to get out. So just bear that in mind. And once again, this has got the system where you can extend that so that you can cut down on quick draws. So if I'm doing a mixed route, I'm sometimes in two minds as to whether to take an ice screw with me. In really early season, you can afford to just take rock gear because the ice hasn't had a chance to build up. But once you get into the end of January, February, you know that there's going to be ice having built up, and so even if you're doing a mixed route, it doesn't hurt to just take a couple of ice screws. And what I do when I'm taking an ice screw with me is I pretty much always take a little bit of coat hanger, and this basically is so that I can do an Abolikoff thread if I find that actually I want more ice screw type placements, a V thread so I can hook the sling out through the thread that I make with the ice screw. But the other good thing about having a piece of wire like this, I've already mentioned threads. When you pass a sling around the back of a block, having a piece of wire like this to pull it back round is really useful because sometimes you can't manage it with your ice axe, and so just having one of these, even if you haven't got ice screws with you, can be pretty useful. So that's basically me having winterized my rack. It's obviously a very, very personal thing, and basically what I've talked about here is a mixed climbing rack, and I'll move on to an ice climbing rack at another stage. Happy climbing!